On September 21st, 1996, John F. Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessette were married in near darkness on an island where wild horses outnumber residents and silence carries farther than headlines. The setting was the First African Baptist Church on Cumberland Island, a barrier island 1 mile off the coast of Georgia. The church, founded in 1893 by a black congregation, was simple and wooden, with just 8 pews and no air conditioning. It was not grand. It was not designed for spectacle. It was intimate, spare, and profoundly symbolic. For John and Carolyn, that obscurity was the point. Only 40 guests were invited. 40 for a man whose name alone could have filled St. Patrick's Cathedral. The limited guest list was strategic, emotional, and practical. Fewer people meant fewer leaks, fewer variables, fewer chances for a single whisper to reach Manhattan. The planning took 6 months. Letitia Baldridge, former White House Chief of Staff to Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, later told People that orchestrating the wedding required the skill of James Bond and the whole CIA. Guests were contacted individually and discreetly. Travel was staggered. Private aircraft were used. Ferries were coordinated quietly. Confidentiality agreements were reportedly signed by attendees and staff. Vendors were carefully vetted. As the wedding weekend approached, locals on Cumberland Island began noticing subtle signs. Unfamiliar faces arriving by plane and ferry, activity at the Grayfield Inn, deliveries moving under careful watch. Still, details remained tightly guarded. Chris McLean, a builder living in nearby Fernandina Beach, Florida, told People at the time they couldn't have chosen a more obscure place. The island's remoteness was its security system. There were no major roads, no chain hotels, no quick drive-ups. Access required intention. Guests arrived on Cumberland Island on September 20th and stayed at the Grayfield Inn, a 9-bedroom mansion built in 1900 by the Carnegie family and, at the time, the only hotel on the island. The inn served as the central gathering place for the weekend's events. Its wide verandas, white columns, and preserved southern woodwork created a setting defined by privacy and warmth rather than scale or extravagance. Guests attended a rehearsal dinner on the veranda of the Grayfield Inn the evening before the wedding.
Most of all, we want to thank Freeman Bessette for their generosity and hospitality. We want to just say that you're not only gaining John as a son-in-law, but you're gaining 75 Kennedy. And we promise that we'll only visit you 5 and 10.
The rehearsal dinner provided its own study in Carolyn's aesthetic. She chose a Narciso Rodriguez design, a nude silk satin slip, layered beneath an embroidered net of fine caviar beading. The silhouette echoed the lines of her wedding gown, fluid, elongated, cut on the bias, though this version carried subtle shimmer under the veranda lights. She paired the dress with simple, white, strappy Manolo Blahnik sandals. One guest later described the look. It was a version of her wedding gown, a bias-cut tank dress with very subtle beading all over it, and the shoes were Manolo, just plain white strappy sandals. Even the night before her wedding, the message was consistent: clean lines, precision, nothing unnecessary. The rehearsal gathering began in the afternoon and stretched into the night. During dinner, John rose to toast Carolyn as the woman who made him the happiest man alive.
May I say a few words?
Yeah.
Carolyn and I owe all of you a great debt of gratitude. I realize that we imposed certain conditions upon this event, and they may have at times seemed extreme, but what was really important for us was to be able to have a collection of people who we really love to make our lives interesting and meaningful and give both of us in our relationship going forward a sense of connection. Carolyn changed my life in a way that I never thought was possible, and has made me tonight the happiest man alive.
Here, here.
That same evening, John gathered his closest male friends and presented them with custom-made silk boxers embroidered with his initials and theirs, a private, humorous gesture before the ceremony. Later, guests gathered for a bonfire on the beach. Contemporary accounts describe roughly 20 boxes of cigars and hundreds of bottles of cognac and armagnac, creating the impression of a smuggler's cash washed ashore. On the morning of the ceremony, John filmed his oldest friend, Billy Noonan, capturing relaxed, unscripted moments before the formalities began.
Hey Noonan, I'm a member of the Massachusetts State Police. We were here to do a sobriety test.
Oh, God.
Please
Fail.
When it was time to travel to the church, guests were unaware that it was 7 miles away along a dirt road. Their transportation would be pickup trucks and jeeps. As they drove along the beach, helicopters appeared overhead. If the media discovered the ceremony's location, reporters would descend on the island, and everything John and Carolyn had worked so carefully to protect would be compromised.
They have ruined everything.
Fortunately, the drivers turned into the island's tree-lined trails and lost the helicopters before reaching the church. When the guests arrived at the Baptist church, the ceremony was scheduled to begin at 5:30 p.m., and they hadn't even swept the church yet. They waited nearly an hour and a half before John F. Kennedy Jr. arrived. It was hot, and everyone was thirsty. Shirts and clothes were soaked through in the southern humidity. Then, suddenly, a man appeared out of nowhere with a truck full of ice-cold Heineken. Moments later, John arrived late because he realized he had forgotten his father's cufflinks and rushed back to retrieve them.
Run! Run like the wind!
But as the groom took his place, everyone quickly realized the bride was nowhere to be seen. Guests began to wonder if everything was all right. It had been more than 2 hours past the ceremony's original start time. The sun was setting, and there was no electricity inside the church. As the light faded, some worried whether the space would even be suitable for the ceremony. Then someone found candles near the altar and lit them throughout the church. By the time Carolyn finally arrived, the room was almost completely dark, illuminated only by candlelight. What no one knew was that Carolyn was late because she couldn't get her Narciso Rodriguez wedding dress over her head. The gown's neckline was too tight, and Narciso Rodriguez had to open and re-sew the dress onto her body. Because the gown had to pass over her head, a silk scarf was placed carefully over her hair to shield her styling as friends guided the dress into place. Afterward, her hair and makeup were touched up before she left for the church. When guests took their seats, they found simple gifts waiting for them. A Bible inscribed John and Carolyn, September 21st, 1996, and a handheld fan to ease the southern heat. The ceremony was Catholic and officiated by Reverend Charles J. O'Byrne of Manhattan's Church of St. Ignatius Loyola, the same church where Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis' funeral mass had been held in 1994. O'Byrne read portions of the service by flashlight. The atmosphere was humid and hushed. 40 guests sat in 8 pews, fanning themselves in the southern heat. Outside, Cumberland Island remained still. John dressed with characteristic simplicity, a navy suit, crisp white shirt, and pale blue tie. The tailoring was classic and understated, intentionally unobtrusive beside her. As one friend later remarked, it may have been the first time John F. Kennedy Jr. was not the center of attention. Carolyn's entrance felt almost cinematic. George Kyriakos, her longtime friend and hairstylist, later said the gravity of the moment did not fully register until she stepped forward in the finished gown. a bias-cut silk crepe slip dress designed by Narciso Rodriguez. When she walked out, I gasped. Kyriakos remembered. It was that beautiful. The dress appeared simple at first glance, ivory with a soft luminosity that reflected the candlelight inside the church. Its impact came from line and movement rather than embellishment. Rodriguez later explained her vision in direct terms. She wanted something a bit more sensuous, not your typical wedding dress. It had to be very sexy. Several final iterations were created before the completed version was chosen. The gown has been estimated at approximately $40,000 and was reportedly a gift from the designer. Fashion editors recognized its significance almost immediately. Former Vogue editor Kate Betts later reflected on its influence. In 1996, it was still a pretty iconic wedding dress. Vera Wang and Carolina Herrera were simplifying their designs, but not as simple as a slip dress. Carolyn's dress was revolutionary in that sense, that someone would wear something that simple. It crystallized that trend, minimalism, in fashion. Her accessories were equally deliberate. She wore crystal-beaded satin Manolo Blahnik sandals, long silk tulle opera gloves, and a hand-rolled silk tulle veil that moved lightly in the evening air. Nothing distracted from the silhouette. Her hair was arranged in a low, softly twisted bun, and secured with a clip that had belonged to Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. George Kyriakos later described the styling. The front was very clean, with some texture in the back to make it look like she had done it herself. It was simple, but perfect. Makeup remained understated. Her skin appeared luminous, her lips natural, her eyes softly defined. Rosemarie Terenzio later suggested that Carolyn applied much of it herself. Sheer moisturizer, a touch of eyeliner, mascara, and her favorite Bobbi Brown ruby stain lip color. In her hands, she carried lilies of the valley, arranged by Rachel Bunny Mellon, the horticulturist known for redesigning the White House rose garden. The bouquet was small, traditional, and fragrant. One guest later recalled the overall impression. There was such purity to the look, as if she had stripped everything down to its essence. That decision, the bias-cut silk crepe slip by Narciso Rodriguez, set the tone for the entire wedding. Minimal, private, intentional, and unmistakably her own. As the vows began, Carolyn moved down the aisle in long silk gloves and crystal-beaded Manolo Blahnik sandals, her hand-rolled tulle veil falling softly behind her. In her hands, she carried lilies of the valley, small, fragrant, and perfectly suited to the candlelit chapel. During the ceremony, gospel singer David R. Davis performed Amazing Grace and Will the Circle Be Unbroken, a cappella. Songs that had been requested by John and Carolyn earlier that morning, his voice rising unaccompanied through the darkened wooden church.
Was blind, but now I see. Was grace that...
Among the 40 guests inside the First African Baptist Church was Anthony Radziwill, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis's nephew, and one of John's closest lifelong friends, who served as best man. Radziwill and John had grown up together, spending summers in Hyannisport and sharing overlapping social and family circles. By the time of the wedding, Radziwill was privately battling cancer, which made his role beside John especially significant. Maurice Templesman, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis's longtime companion and financial advisor, attended as well. Caroline Kennedy arrived with her husband, Edwin Schlossberg. As John's only sibling, Caroline represented the immediate Kennedy family. Their 3 children were part of the ceremony. Rose and Tatiana Schlossberg served as flower girls, and their brother Jack Schlossberg acted as ring-bearer. From Carolyn's side were her stepfather, her mother, Anne Messina Freeman, her sister, Lisa Ann Bessette, and her brother-in-law, Michael Roman. The guest list was tightly controlled. Each attendee had signed confidentiality agreements in advance. The final number remained at approximately 40, in keeping with the church's physical limitations of 8 wooden pews and its remote location on Cumberland Island. Though Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis had died 2 years earlier, her influence was unmistakable. Rachel Bunny Mellon selected the flowers for the bridal party. Efigenio Pinheiro, Jackie's longtime butler, arranged greenery at the altar. The aesthetic leaned in an elegant manner. White blooms, greenery, and texture rather than dramatic color. Rob Littell later recalled a small, telling moment. John fumbled with the ring, and Carolyn gently put her hand on his shoulder and laughed. That moment, right there, was so subtle and loving. That was her.
My John and Carolyn, my lawful wife, to have and to hold, from this day forward, you have declared your consent before the church. God has joined, no one must divide.
As the ceremony concluded and the newlyweds stepped into the evening air, photographer Dennis Reggie captured what would become the defining image of the wedding. Speaking to Vanity Fair in 2021, Reggie described the moment. "It was an incredibly magical moment," he said. "I saw it as it was unfolding, almost in silhouette. It was virtually dark outside. John reached for the hand of Carolyn. She was caught off guard. I'm walking backwards in the light rain at dusk, and John does this amazing gesture, taking her hand and bringing it to his lips. He emphasized that nothing was posed. I adored her expression. It says it all. The way she flowed in her beautiful dress, moving at full pace, coming down the steps. It was happening in real time and not in any way posed or arranged. It was a really special photograph." That single image later appeared on the cover of People and became the public's only authentic glimpse into a wedding they had not been allowed to witness. You're watching Cultured Elegance. If you appreciate long-form films exploring historical figures, fashion, design, and interiors, I invite you to subscribe and consider becoming a channel member today. As the ceremony ended, everyone joined in singing, "When the Saints Go Marching In." Everything felt completely natural and completely them. After the ceremony at the First African Baptist Church, guests returned to the grounds of the Grayfield Inn, where a tented reception awaited on the lawn. While they traveled back in pickup trucks and jeeps along the island's dirt roads, a sudden storm came out of nowhere. Lightning flashed high above the clouds, and a light rain began to fall. Billy Noonan remarked that it was as if what had just happened was being acknowledged and blessed. The reception dinner reflected the island's coastal setting, and the couple's preference for understatement. The meal was prepared by chef Jody Sadowski, in collaboration with Savannah restaurateur Elizabeth Terry. Despite tight timing and logistical challenges, Sadowski reportedly did not receive the finalized menu until the morning of the event, leaving little room for delay. The dinner began with fresh artichokes served with balsamic vinaigrette. The main course featured roasted free-range capon with wild mushroom demi-glace, rosemary roasted Irish potatoes, and patty pan squash with fresh herbs. Some reports also mention additional offerings, including shrimp, grilled swordfish, and lemon raspberry ice cream. The wedding cake was a traditional 3-tier vanilla buttercream confection, adorned with flowers in soft, understated tones. in keeping with the aesthetic of the weekend. The menu emphasized seasonal Southern simplicity rather than opulence, consistent with the tone of the entire weekend. John and Carolyn shared their first dance to Prince's "Forever in My Life." Senator Ted Kennedy delivered a toast that evening which, according to his spokeswoman Melody Miller, was so emotional that it left many of the guests in tears.
Something that my mother and father understood so well, and that is that the real test of a human life is how your children turn out. And what a sense of joy both of them would have for John and Carolyn. Just after John was born, the ambassador from Ireland came to the White House, Ambassador McKiernan, and it's going to be short, John. At the time, he read a poem that had been written about his son when his son was born. He mentioned these lines to my brother Jack. "We wish to the new child a heart that can be beguiled by a flower, a heart that can recognize, without aid of the eyes, the gifts that life holds for the wise. And when the storms breaks for him, may the trees shake for him their blossoms down. In the night that he is troubled, may a friend wait for him, so that his time be doubled. And at the end of all the loving and love, may the man above give him a crown."
There were no televised entrances, no red carpets, no spectacle. The party was small but lively. Guests danced to a mix of Prince and contemporary hits, the air warm and the atmosphere relaxed. One of the island's wild horses ended up nibbling on Carolyn's bouquet. She later sent a photo of the incident to a friend, delighted by the whimsy. Narciso Rodriguez later said, "It was magical, just perfect. Everything you could dream of, done in the simplest way." When news of the wedding finally broke, it did so after the fact. The press had been outmaneuvered. The ceremony had taken place entirely on the couple's terms. The wedding remains one of the most carefully executed private events in modern American social history. It combined strategy and symbolism. A son of a president married in a church built by formerly enslaved congregants. A bride who defined 1990s minimalism chose a slip dress rather than a ball gown. A family known for public tragedy secured a moment of joy that no reporter could infiltrate. 8 pews, 40 guests, candlelight, a flashlight illuminating vows, a silk crepe dress that altered bridal fashion, a first dance to Prince, a photograph taken in light rain at dusk. For a few hours on Cumberland Island, John F. Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessette achieved something rare. They controlled their story, and in doing so, they created one of the most enduring wedding images of the 20th century. You're watching Cultured Elegance. If you value thoughtful long-form storytelling on fashion, design, and cultural history, consider subscribing or joining as a channel member.